Hello, everybody at home. My name is Dean Deblois, and I am the writer, director, and executive producer of How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World.
And I am Brad Lewis. I don't have as many titles as Dean does on the movie, but I was the producer on How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World.
Hi, and the guy with the weird accent, that's Simon Otto, that's me. And I was the head of animation on the film.
And this was a painting that I was developing as a time lapse over the course of the movie.
Your evening project.
So this opening sequence was actually designed to do a couple of things. We wanted to establish our heroes quickly for those who might have been unfamiliar with the previous films or the TV series. And we wanted to set up the stakes that there are still dragon hunters out there and dragons are still in danger. We wanted to present our heroes in cool new outfits that show how far they've come and how similar they are to their own dragons. These are made from shed dragon scales, which make them fireproof. And we just wanted everyone to have a really cool introduction that allows us to define them in a really quick way.
I was really happy to see that image became one of the posters when Hiccup walks through the fire. It's
Yes.
really amazing.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites as well.
I'm not a demon.
One of the things, Dean, you always said is that, Hiccup was actually sort of becoming a dragon himself. And I always thought that image of him walking through the fire was sort of one of the iconic images for this scene.
Yeah, and then of course it all starts to fall apart. So we wanted a moment of cool for Hiccup to be reintroduced to the audience along with Toothless, and then to have it just all start to go haywire with the arrival of everyone else. The idea was that we wanted to present this gang of dragon rescuers that have all been trained under Valka to do that sort of vigilante work of rescuing dragons, but to also show that they're far too reliant upon their own dragons for their success, and they haven't really come to rely upon one another yet. It's a little bit of a journey they have through the story of becoming a better team together and not so dependent on their dragons in every situation.
And now he's right where I wanted him. Let's get to work.
The other tonal thing that we really worked on the balance for in this scene was, because it's a big action scene, but our gang, they're funny, right? They're hapless. They don't always do everything perfectly. And part of it is also reintroducing the audience, or a new audience, into what the real tone and fun and interrelationships are, and that these guys they can be a bumbling crew as well as even if they're doing something that looks kind of daring do.
Yeah.
Why can't I get this cage open?
It's like
We should talk about this shot real quick. So this shot was one of the most challenging shots in the movie for us in animation, because it essentially is, I think, 1,000 frame shots with no cut. And we figured out a way to do it by adding like 7 animators, and we grabbed them from other movies just to kind of work on this shot. It was essentially a little short film that they did all together, handing off from one character to the other. And it was incredible to see how this shot came together in a fairly quick time for what this shot is.
This is the longest shot ever created by DreamWorks, correct?
I mean, it's definitely up there. If it's not the longest, it's definitely one of them.
Yeah, it was certainly ambitious on the part of Gil Zimmerman, our head of layout. He was inspired by some of these shots of dense choreography that we had seen in recent films, and he wanted to create it in animation, but he didn't quite realize what we were handing off to
What
our
it
animation
means.
team.
Eventually. Move out! We got them all! I'm gonna handle
I love the dense fog and the light and the way the light plays with it. I think that was really exciting.
It was really nice to actually start the film with what becomes a series of very strong color choices in terms of the palette and time of day and atmosphere. And I really love the bold choices they were making. Now here's the last purpose of this scene, which is to introduce, in a very brief way, the Light Fury. That she was one of the dragons left behind in the cages. But because of her camouflage, she ends up remaining there because Toothless didn't quite make her out. He senses that someone's there, but doesn't quite figure it out until a little bit later in the story. Now, of course, we wanted to have our iconic fly into the village with the "This is Burke" speech, and really use this moment to establish how far gone they are as a dragon Viking utopia. It's on the brink of collapse. It's absolutely overpopulated, and we want it to be fun and chaotic. No one's really complaining about it except for maybe Gobber, but it should look unsustainable. It should look like they can't handle these numbers, and they're going to have to make a change in some way. So part of Hiccup's problem in this story is that he's in denial about it. He's achieved his dream. Here it is, dragons and Vikings living together, the largest commune on the planet, and at the same time, it's going to fall apart very soon.
Gang, meet our latest Burkians. Welcome to paradise, mate.
It was really challenging for our crowds department on this movie to populate these scenes with so many dragons and so many Vikings and still not distract the eye so that you're able to follow the important action. You know, hats off to the whole department. They managed crazy numbers. I think they've done the most complex shots by far in DreamWorks history within this movie.
I think the real hero of the day.
Yeah, that's really challenging to give them all a purpose, and they feel like they belong in the environment and are doing something specific. And I think we succeeded.
We were trying to establish some relationships here that we wanted to track through the story. This one is Snotlout wanting to be the prize student, and he's doing everything he can to kind of suck up to Volka and then gloat to the others about his status.
You found a new friend.
This is also our chance to introduce a couple of our new dragons. The Gorgutter, which is based on the ancient elk.
Yes.
And also the hobgobblers, as well as Fishmeat.
Right. Fishmeat is a baby Gronkle. So Fishlegs rides a Gronkle named Meatlug, and this is one of her babies, and he acts as the surrogate father, carrying it around in a little baby Bjorn.
Is having the king of dragons around if he can't keep the order.
Hey, bud, you wanna do something here?
And where do you suppose we put these ones?
We'll make room.
Ah!
Another silly little through line. We designed this dragon partly inspired by a tree frog meets a French bulldog, and he's in part voiced by my now sadly deceased little French bulldog named Gordy. But he's an alarming sight for Gobber, and we don't quite know why, but as we track through the story, we start to see the hobgobblers multiplying at an alarming rate, and finally we'll pay that off in the end.
Just asking for trouble.
You know, this opening shot coming into this sequence, in addition to the opening shot of seeing how overcrowded Burke was, and that fly-in shot, and the shot we talked about on the ship, three of the most complex shots in DreamWorks history, all with the entirely different lighting setups and amount of detail, really stretching the new render, and our lighting team and effects team just knocked these out of the park.
And I think that the thing to say there is, like, usually an animator takes on a shot and does all the characters in the shot. For example, this shot was animated by Sean Sexton, who just animated all these characters, and then there's crowds characters that are done by the crowds department. But some of these special shots that you're mentioning, Brad, are shots that were animated by 5 to 8 animators at the same time, and to coordinate how the characters interact with each other is incredibly challenging in CG animation.
Right here.
Okay, I'll think about it.
Hang up those saddles and get married.
I think POV and Dave had their hands filled with lots of high aspirational ideas in this movie that Roger Deakins helped them execute.
With you wearing the pants, there's still hope.
Wow. Not awkward at all.
Astrid, don't be like that.
Whoa, that is a definitive no. Look,
If you need a beer to cry on, just lean on my shoulder and you can cry into my full...
How many beer jokes did we have in the original version of this in storyboard? I think we had like 6 beer jokes. And Dean, I think we kind of fell in love with them, but I think we got some early feedback. We needed to pull a couple back.
Some late feedback as well. We ended up cutting a couple of shots that were done and lit that had tough nut cracking beard jokes. It just turned out to be a bit too many. Now here again is a completely different look. This whole location was actually designed to represent the oppression, the negative effect of the warring humans and how they kind of desecrate this sacred site and turn it into a war camp. And here we see dragons are being caged and tortured and being weaponized. And this whole idea was to show what awaits the dragons should Hiccup and his people fail to protect them. This is where that cargo of dragons was headed to.
And another species of dragon that we hadn't shown before, these death grippers, are sort of a mixture of scorpion and strange, insect-like beasts. That was really something we had to develop and invent in the way these guys move.
Now, normally we figure out the casting for a character before we get very far into animating that character. In this case, it was special and different. We had finally settled upon a design that we really liked for Grimmel, and that was provided to us by Carter Goodrich. And as that character was turned into a model and articulated and ready for animation, the supervising animator of this character, whose name is Ronnie Namani, was kind of just looking through the internet and considering different possibilities of who the actor might be that would play the character. And he was providing a few suggestions. And in the case of F. Murray Abraham, he found a clip that he really liked, and he animated a test using the animation rig that was ready for this character. And it was so appealing and surprising and charming that it won everybody over. And Murray wasn't immediately on our minds for a candidate to play the character, but this completely sold us. And so we sent that test and a description of the character to Murray, and he responded right away saying that he would love to be a part of it. And it was the best choice we could have made. He's just such a fantastic character.
And as a enthusiastic actor, every session, Murray's just infectious enthusiasm and always wanting to get it right and working hard to make sure that he loved it, Dean loved it, and that we got the story point right.
It was really a highlight for the animators when Murray came to our daily session and he sat in and sort of sat with us as we were reviewing some animation, and all the animators were sitting in the room. It was really a highlight for everybody.
They don't have a leader, just a boy. Hiccup.
Originally, this flashback was meant to be one of, I think, 6 different flashbacks we had in the movie that would show Hiccup at a young age interacting with his father, memories that had an impact on his present day and the decisions that he had to make. And they were really sweet. We've included some as deleted scenes in the home video version of this. But when you're making an animated movie, you're limited by time. The budget dictates how long the movie can be because it's so expensive to make these films. And so ultimately we had to choose the most important flashbacks to use in the movie and the ones that had the greatest relevance in the narrative. And so, yeah, we had to cherry pick. This is one of 2 flashbacks that we have in the film with Stoic. And I think it lends a really warm presence to see this character back on screen. And also it's just very sweet to see Hiccup at an even younger age. It gives us a glimpse into those moments that made Hiccup the character he is.
You know, for me, this moment when he admits that he had a plan for peace coexisting with the dragons, to me is a huge reveal in this flashback that really buys its way into the movie. You know, that flashbacks should be there not just to reminisce, but to be there for a good, strong story purpose. And the idea that maybe Hiccup and his dad do share some similarity of heart and soul by knowing that Stoic wanted to have the dragons put away from the humans so they wouldn't be warring forever, I thought was a really great early reveal, emotional reveal.
Yeah, it gives you sort of a greater understanding of the character, right, of Stoic.
Gliding on your own, bud.
So, you know, in this scene, we have fun with the prosthetic, right? Where they're playing catch with the prosthetic. And I think early on, we thought the idea and story was it was entertaining, but we wanted to make sure we're being respectful about it. We had the opportunity to show the movie to the Amputee Coalition, and they laughed heartily at this scene. And they said they really enjoyed this and other ideas and fun that we had with the prosthetic and sort of interactions.
The whole world knows about us now.
Yep. And the more dragons we bring back here, the bigger of a target we become. Ugh. I just wish there was some way to make them leave us alone.
A lot of these scenes between Hiccup and Astrid through all three movies were animated by the two supervising animators of these two characters, Jakob Jensen for Hiccup and Shaggy Hornby for Astrid. And they have kind of reached a level of understanding of these characters and how these characters move that in the launches that you, Dean, gave these animators, you kind of just gave them the box of what the purpose of the story is and how the scene should function, and you kind of let them explore it. And it was really great to watch them come back with not just one scene, but usually a string of scenes, 10, 12 scenes strung together, and you could really watch the moment unfold. And of course, there's other animators that supported the sequence as well, but it's very interesting to see them work together on these scenes.
Yeah, and on Hiccup in this movie in particular, Fabio Legnini had taken the lead on a lot of these important performance shots with Hiccup, including this right here.
Yeah, these are
such
his,
a playful, beautiful interaction between the two of them. And it feels so natural. I mean, that was our goal. We wanted to make sure that Hiccup and Astrid feel like an established couple. They don't have to be kind of giddy around one another and, you know, nervous and full of butterflies. I think they've been together long enough that they know how to rib each other and just be comfortable in one another's presence. We want to get the sense that Hiccup is unaware that Astrid is his true support and his future, because everything that Hiccup has achieved so far is largely credited to his bond with Toothless. Before that, Hiccup was kind of in the way all the time. He couldn't do anything right. And his relationship with Toothless is what changed everything for him. Now he's respected, he's powerful, he's a leader. And I think Hiccup's deepest insecurity is that should Toothless ever go away, that he would be reduced to that unworthy character he saw himself as in the first film of the trilogy. And this is really where we introduce that problem, that challenge for Hiccup. So Toothless comes upon this rare and elusive variation of his species rather innocently in the woods. He doesn't quite realize at the moment that this is part of a trap. And she does try to warn him right away. But the idea is that she's the engine of change. She's brought into the story in a nefarious way through Grimmel, but her interaction with Toothless is pure. And his fascination with her is met with her curiosity about him. So going forward, they're drawn together. And we soon learn through Grimmel that Furies mate for life. So it's a bond that neither one of them can really fight. And Hiccup, who is at first very enthusiastic about Toothless finding a mate, is going to have to come to realize that Toothless having a mate means Toothless will be drawn back into the wild eventually.
You can see here some of the great fun and challenge of working on the How to Train Your Dragon movies for the animators was that you were communicating, you know, fairly complex story moments through pantomime with animal behavior. And the supervising animators on these two characters, Dane Stogner for Toothless and Thomas Grumt for the Light Fury, at a real important moment here to just understand that she tells him, don't come here, something really dangerous is here. And then his just immediate crush that he experiences on her and then her disappearing.
And that disappearance was something that we came up with for the Light Fury in order to make her have a unique ability, one that she later teaches Toothless. So the idea was that she would blast a fireball ahead of herself, fly through it, and the heat from the fire would turn her skin and her scales mirror-like, so that she would reflect her environment, whether it's in the sky or in the forest. She would seem to disappear until she cooled off, and then she would reappear seemingly out of nowhere.
No dorsal plates.
Okay, got it.
What a night. What's gotten into you? What is all this slobbering and panting?
Isn't it obvious? He's in love.
Trust me, relationships are nothing but pain and misery. What did I just say?
I always love watching Fish Meat in Fishleg's backpack or wherever he is. He seems to be perpetually entertained. Very happy little dragon.
So we did a lot of hunting for animal behavior on this movie, in story and in animation. It's like, what are all the interesting things that different kinds of animals do to, mating dances and courtship behavior, and then also just like everyday things that animals do. And we really try to find the behaviors that fit these dragons the best, that help us also define and differentiate each dragon. We wanted them to feel grounded in reality and feel familiar.
Back to the woods and see if we can find her.
Ah, good idea. A little privacy. It's boy talk.
What?
Come on, let's go work this out.
Again, I love the contrast that our production designer, Pierre-Olivier Vincent, and our visual effects supervisor, Dave Walford, came up with in working with Roger Deakins for each of these sequences. They feel complementary and yet very different. Going into the forest from that stable, the palette changes completely, and we really kind of commit to the idea of the environment and how that bounce light affects the color of their skin, and the environment's just alive with insects, and all of the ferns are moving around. This is something that we were not really able to do in the past, or if we attempted it, it was at great anguish and expense. But the great gain of this movie is that we have something called Moonray now, and it's a back-end renderer, which allows us to put so much detail on screen that was just not possible before, because it's very fast, and the method of tracking the light from these sources is much more sophisticated. It actually tracks the light rays from whatever light you decide is the dominant light of your scene, and then so as the light falls upon their faces or their hair, that's all calculated in rays. And as the light bounces off of, say, the green ferns and gives them a green underlight, that's also all calculated. Millions of light rays calculated mathematically at lightning fast speed, and it just gives it such a sophisticated look.
Technology is really kind of they're the unsung heroes of our movies, right? In a way, like pushing it forward at each, with each movie, like some new things become available that allow us to do certain things visually that we weren't before.
This movie's a tour de force for that kind of thing. In addition to what Dean was talking about with the renderer, we have all the ferns moving. We've got the hair on top of the cliff blowing. We've got character effects and effects development that we're sort of debuting on this movie that allows us to handle, hundreds and thousands of effects on things in a scene that really, it sets you atmospherically in that place. You really get a feel for that scene because of all these things that are naturally happening that might not draw your eye, but it really brings you to a sense of place.
It's tangible and it feels real, yeah. It's designed and stylized, but it feels real. That's always something we talked about, is like in terms of look and design, we wanted a world that felt caricatured and pushed to a certain degree, and the shapes were exaggerated, and it was sort of a whimsical version of reality, but we always wanted the textures to feel real and the world to be believable, and so that we could believe in the dragons and the human characters and their emotions and the story in itself.
Yeah, the look is very much tied to the story conceit of making it appear as though dragons once roamed this world, our world. And this is the story of when they existed and ultimately when they went away. And part of that was we wanted people to believe in the peril. You know, not only are these dragons influenced by very specific animals that the animators referenced, but they also are, very importantly, the physics feel real. You know, if you got in the way of dragon fire, it would burn you. If you fell from a great height, you wouldn't make it. You would die. This is a world where cartoon physics are not the dominant mentality. And so part of that was rendering it with a certain amount of believability, with credibility in the textures. When you see the fur, the scales, the hair, the skin, it's designed to look tangible and credible as opposed to leaning on cartoony conventions too heavily.
Well, your father knew of me. Now, there was a chief, one of the greatest dragon hunters to have ever lived. What would he think of you?
We talk about little bits of improv in different sessions. I love that take of Murray's when he does, should I call you Hiccup? Or that was just so funny. Just kind of him playing around with different deliveries for that, the idea for that line when he came up with that.
This, the sting in the line when he says, what would he think of you? It's just love it. And it really comes through that he's mocking him.
You are going to give me that dragon, or
I will never.
This movie allowed us some opportunities to really explore a villain that had charm and a point of view and, you know, just some on-screen entertainment. He's not just a brute. He represents intolerance. He's cunning and calculating. He's an accomplished hunter who's established a reputation for himself by being so effective. And so we wanted to create a nemesis that was going to be fitting for Hiccup, and somebody whose core philosophy was absolutely opposed to what Hiccup stands for. This idea of integration, of coexistence, is appalling to Grimmel. And so not only has he come here to find Toothless, to trap him and ultimately kill him, he's come here to teach this kid a lesson about his forward thinking and what it would do to his world.
You know, and he's a very different kind of a hunter. It's not just a might hunter. The way he's eliminated night furies is by psychologically outthinking them, right? It's a predator that outthinks his prey. And basically, now we're introducing the idea of it's exactly what he's going to do with Hiccup, his new prey. He's going to psychologically outthink him. He's psychotic.
These Death Grippers were a lot of fun to design as well, but we recognized that we needed to establish a method by which Grimmel could control them. Because within our world, that's important. We know that Hiccup has taught people how to befriend dragons. Drago was all about brute force and intimidation. But Grimmel's a little smarter than that, and so he's actually used this specific species, which has a stinger not unlike a scorpion, and he extracts the venom. And with small doses, by re-injecting that venom, he can subdue dragons and kind of lean on their will a little heavier.
All right, everybody, settle down, please. Fish legs. Have you ever seen that species of dragon before?
Let me at him! I'll give him a piece of my mind! And by mind, I mean fists!
Did you miss the part where we almost died? Have you seen my house? This is a new kind of enemy.
We did so many versions of this scene. Some of them were just with Hiccup and Astrid and Valka. Simon boarded at least 3 of them. Ultimately, it ended up being this town hall with everybody. And it's an important scene because it has to be credible that Hiccup would consider leaving their home of 7 generations to embark on this wild goose chase of a quest. We had to make sure that the stakes were high enough, that he didn't seem overreactive, nor did he seem cowardly. He needs to be thinking about the future. And even though it's controversial among his people, his point needs to be strong. And so we thought having everybody gathered together in the wake of Grimmel's attack was the right moment to float this wild idea, this very hiccupy idea of finding the hidden world.
The other thing that we talked about is there's a demarcation point here. This is as confident as we have seen Hiccup to this point in time as a leader. And he's got Toothless by his side. And it's sort of little do we know that after this scene, he loses Toothless, and then he also loses his confidence. So it's sort of like visually, symbolically important as well to the story that Toothless is at his side.
Right, and what's also important is that Astrid, even though she doesn't believe in this idea, that she thinks it's kind of crazy, she already said so on the top of the cliff, she does silence everybody and support him publicly. And that's something that is powerful in their relationship, and I think it speaks to how necessary they are to one another.
We are Burke, the people, the dragons. I say Burke is wherever we go.
I'm with him! Who else?
So Simon, you should talk about the challenges of having this many dragons and people and sheep in disguise all up in the air. It's got to be pretty complicated. Right?
Yeah. And again, you say similar to earlier, the shot, like there's so many layers of different people doing different things. Obviously, there's the hero animation, the foreground character animation, and then different levels of crowds in the back. In certain cases, like for example, Gothi with her 7 terrible terrors back there, that was animated by an animator who was just working on that particular thing, and then we copied that animation into multiple shots. So we found so many different ways in making it, because even like you couldn't open a shot inside a software and see it all in its finished state. So we had to kind of find some workarounds to get it all in there and make it entertaining and believable.
It just keeps going. That's because the world is actually round. The sun's round, the moon is round, stars are round, even though they're small and stupid. Right, stars.
Don't fret.
Now, these intercut scenes used to be entire scenes onto themselves, and it was thanks to our editors and very clever idea of turning it into more of a montage by just keeping the best bits of both scenes and intercutting them.
The Light Fury! She's following us!
That's such a tough effect to pull off, period. But to pull that disappearing effect off in the middle of the bright sky is just effects team did a phenomenal job on that.
Yeah.
This is just one of my favorite moments in the movie.
It just tosses her.
Hey, it's nice to meet you.
That always got a laugh from the early boards and the different versions we had of it. It's just always worked. She would just toss him.
And also in a comedic way goes to express the dilemma here. Hiccup is learning very quickly that he's not part of this equation. And if Toothless is to establish a relationship with the Light Fury and, have her join their flock, then he's going to have to do it on his own. Because Hiccup is unwelcome in the Light Fury's world. She's quick to get rid of him, which is kind of embarrassing and humbling for him, the Viking who's taught everyone how to interact with dragons and who seemingly can tame even the most, wild and aggressive of dragons.
They can only have gone.
So if POV, Pierre-Olivier Vincent, our production designer, were here, he would talk about this island, which we come to know as New Burke, as being kind of a bold statement. It was meant to be an island that looms out of the clouds, with sheer cliffs, hundreds of feet high, and above it, through these rocky battlements, you would discover a valley, a pristine valley with a lake, trees and pastures, and just this ideal spot for the dragons and the humans, which is accessed only by those with wings. It's both safe and kind of a paradise. We figured if they were going to leave Burke, then they would have to find a place that was not just equal, but would surpass it in its beauty. And ultimately, though it makes its way into the story as kind of a pit stop, it becomes, in the end, the place where the Vikings settle.
What? Get out of my house! Hey, is there a problem here? Yeah, there's a problem. Ever since you showed up, you've been trying to upstage me. You're just so jealous. It's delusional. Yeah, delusion's a good word for it. Listen, son of Eric.
Beautiful shot by Sean Sexton. He's got a real knack for these comedic shots.
Yeah, he was supervising those, like the kids' characters, like Snot Loud, Fish Legs, Rough and Tough. And then Fabio Linini supervised not only parts of Hiccup, but also Gobber throughout all the 3 movies. Here we have the multiplied beach
Right.
balls. You always call them beach balls.
Okay, hold on, gang. I said make camp.
From the moment I wrote that joke, I figured it would get cut out, and strangely, it's always gotten a good laugh, so it remained in. But it was a groaner from the beginning, and we just figured, oh no, nobody wants to be reminded of Stoic's death in such a callous way.
But it sums up Snot Loud in a so
unbelievable.
clearly. He's the only idiot that would say something like that.
I guess this can work as a base in the meantime. It's defensible, hidden. All right, you could.
I love the idea that they immediately want to build an entire village. You know?
Right, that's what they do.
It's not just.
They're so used to rebuilding their own village.
I love how they shave their armpits. Who knew?
Imagine wetted bliss.
It's really important back in the day.
If you're going to continue west, I should head back to make sure we weren't followed.
Great idea. I'll go with you for protection.
We had to make little adjustments to the Snotlout Volca dynamic because upon our first test screening, people thought that there was a little romance developing between them, and that was never the intention. We just wanted to indicate that he was sort of
I wish it were possible.
desperate for her attention. He wanted to be the teacher's pet.
And you know, I tried to do the same.
He just wants validation. Just wants to be number one at something, anything.
slowly adjusting his expectations.
Do you still think I'm crazy, or?
Let's just say there's a whole...
And again, this was a difficult relationship to get right. We adjusted this several times, the Astrid Hiccup dynamic, so that she was just supportive enough without being too sycophantic, I guess, and at the same time supportive where she could have been judgmental, and just finding that right balance so that she's going along with it, but she's letting him know that she doesn't entirely believe in it. And it's just a way of keeping that relationship strong and with strong points of view. They respect one another to give each other the space to think, and yet at the same time, she'll call him out if she thinks that he's leading them astray. This is one of those sequences where we do our best to just get rid of dialogue and let the pantomime and John Powell's beautiful music kind of weave a spell. And we've come to realize since the first film with Forbidden Friendship and Romantic Flight that those sequences become the standout moments in the movie. We knew that we wanted to have this kind of bumbling courtship first date sequence, and with a kind of a magical connection in the beginning as she lures him out of the camp. But
It's actually the first scene we animated. It's the first scene in production.
oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, the very first scene. So it gave us some time to really get up to speed with not only the Light Fury, but getting reacquainted with Toothless.
And it was like we were, and I think at every department we were still pretty small, so we could be just a few people really focusing on getting that the heartbeat of the movie in there already. And I think subsequently it really helped every screening moving forward that we had this centerpiece there already.
And also just learning the animation language of the Light Fury. I mean, there's a lot of conversations about how she might move and how elegant, how feral, how how strong she is. But it was in this scene and these two scenes that we really sort of defined who she is for us as a small team and getting started, but then also for the balance of the movie. It was a real centering time for us.
Actually, the first shot, I think, that is this one right here.
This was the first one to
I
be
believe
animated?
it was one, at least the first one we started with that Laurent Canero did. It's,
I mean, this is this is a familiar, almost cliched situation, going all the way back to Cyrano de Bergerac. The idea that an amateur, a bumbling amateur, might be looking to someone else hiding in the bushes for advice. But yeah, this was our take on it. We thought it would be so fun to have Light Fury, who is of the dragon world. She's actually of the hidden world. She knows the dragon ways, and she's very distrusting of humans, so she hasn't been corrupted at all. Having to interact with Toothless, who is the last of his kind, and who has, over these couple of years, become domesticated. So that interaction was going to be fun regardless, because he clearly likes her, but he has no idea what to do. To make it worse, he's now looking to his human companion for advice, which is a terrible idea. So combined with what he's observed in the stables and with other dragons, and Hiccup giving him cues, he's just making a complete disaster of this. And the idea was to have this sequence be a companion piece to Forbidden Friendship in the first movie, so that when he starts drawing in the sand, you think you know what's going to happen, and in fact, he actually produces something that the first time looks like a real drawing.
Well, we sort of talk about how aspirational the movie is, both in our lighting and effects appetite. This scene for Lawrence Lee and the effects team is, between the water and the sand and everything. There's so much in it. The lighting conceit of having it go from sort of pre-dawn to the sun coming out by the end of the scene, having like it's sort of a time of day change within the scene, all incredibly challenging. And it also sets a really high bar for the movie relatively early on. We've already seen a couple of effects heavy scenes, but what an accomplishment. You can go scene by scene and really see the imprint of so much great teamwork and such aspirational ideas for every one of these sequences.
a lot of the core ideas in the sequence actually came out of the storyboards.
Right, yeah.
Like the boards, I mean, obviously it was recut and restaged and many new ideas came to it, but
Yeah, some terrific ideas from Bolem Bushiba, who had storyboarded a lot of the interaction between the dragons, and then Tron May, who had done some of the early concept work on this sequence too.
Tron was the head of story on the movie.
The first time I saw the lighting renders come through and a shot like this, where you can almost see every grain of sand, I thought, wow, we've grown up. This is amazing. It used to be that we would have to avoid things that would displace under the feet of our characters, couldn't have them walking through grass or loose dirt without it being painful. I'd always say stage it on rock. But this is just so impressive, so believable.
And as it always goes with first sequences, you second guess yourself more than you should. Remember how we were talking about, should these scenes be in, should these scenes be out? And we trimmed down shorter versions and then extended it again. And in the end, I think with a little bit of distance, we felt pretty confident that it was actually there, that we...
It's such a significant thing to talk about. We weren't talking about limitations of artistry or technology or appetite. We were talking about what was right for the story. And that's such an immense freedom to just think about what is right for this shot, for this story, for this sequence, not, oh, we better put that on a tile surface because we can't do something that's organic. It's been phenomenal in that way. This movie, very sort of freeing artistically.
It's the kind of sequence where, the story points come through the script and it's clear what the scene has to be about, but it can be executed in so many different ways that when it's just pantomime and there's no dialogue in it, it can be interpreted so many different ways. And to find that is the pleasure and the pain of making animated movies.
Someone hasn't slept.
Yeah, well, that
That Light Fury won't let me within a mile of her. And neither of us will be getting...
This is another thing, if you're paying attention as the viewer, you'll notice that Astrid is collecting scales that Toothless is scratching off of himself. And they dump them into this little mortar and pestle and mash them up with some Toothless saliva, creating a paint. And that paint, because it's made of dragon scales, is fireproof. So that's the way in which Toothless's new tail can be permanent, can be a tail that will stay together even in dragon fire. And I thought that was a really clever solution that Kevin Oakes came up with. Kevin Oakes is our head of rigging, and he's quite a scientifically minded guy. But if we couldn't put actual scales on the tail, he said, well, why don't you grind them up? And you can have a paint. Just made a lot of sense.
It did.
Fire when ready.
This was one of the early sequences as well.
Yeah.
Remember, maybe the second one that we put in production.
Okay, Toothless. Okay.
I was just going to say in that one shot where Astrid is holding the tail and Hiccup paints it, Astrid's hair is just amazing. Like, there's a lot of really complex hair-on-hair interaction and hair with objects, and Damon Crowe in the character effects department, which is, so a lot of the interaction between the characters and the environment is done in a separate department. They do grass and the ferns and the hair and the cloth, and basically animate a lot of these objects that makes the characters also feel more believable because there's true interaction. The department is led by Damon Crowe, and I think we had a pretty large number of character effects artists on this film. There's so much of that happening.
It's okay.
This shot says a lot about Hiccup's mindset. You know, he was so proud to send him off and determined to help facilitate this bond between Toothless and Light Fury, but he suddenly realizes and feels quite naked without him as he
You
flies
always
off.
describe that moment as the mother sending their kids to school the first day of school.
Putting them on the school bus.
And then the moment after the bus drives away,
Yeah.
doesn't quite know what to do with herself.
This was just a quick moment that we put in to help with the pacing of the movie and to remind the audience that that Grimmel is continuing his pursuit. And so it's staged as an attack, but then we see that he calls off his death grippers because he wants them to come. It's baiting a trap. And it's a nice pairing, actually, with this sequence, which was storyboarded by Simon Otto, and it's a beautiful pantomime sequence of Toothless tracking down the Light Fury after an exhaustive search. He's ready to give up. And then he hears that distant sound of her blasting her fireball. I think they work really well, having the peril and then kind of the romance side by side. It just kind of shows the two paths we're on.
It's a tricky thing to storyboard a sequence and then sort of work on the sequence as it goes through production because you have very specific ideas of what it is.
Oh, I remember,
for them.
Simon. Yeah, it's like, what about this? No. It's like,
You kind of lose sight of what it can be because you're so focused on how you think it should be.
a lot of creative ownership.
I think it's actually a good experience to go through because as a director, like I often have pretty clear ideas about how I envision a moment, but as you move through and you start to work with other artists, you see that idea changes and morphs. And sometimes you think maybe not for the better, but generally for the better. And it's just part of the collaborative effort of putting it up on screen. So you kind of have to embrace the idea that it's a team effort, and
Yeah.
everybody brings to it their best and what they think are the winning ideas, and it's not necessarily always the way that you pictured it.
Yeah, and give people a chance to really add to the ideas that you would have not come up with.
Yeah.
The great thing about several of these first beats of these moments between Light Fury and Toothless are, one of the reasons Toothless, I think, works so well is we thrust him into situations that we relate to, right? He's been trying to impress the Light Fury who he met. He's out searching for her. It's like he's cruising Main Street, just hoping to see her in a car or something like that. And then he's here trying to impress her with his strength and abilities. It's just, we can all sort of see ourselves, some memory of some situation where we're trying to impress somebody. It's so fun.
So we're aware that the Aurora Borealis does not come out on a moonlit night.
Hey,
but it's here for fantasy. And this was the idea that we wanted to introduce this waterfall at the edge of the world, as Stoic described it, without indicating that it's actually the volcanic caldera, that it's not a circular formation. It just appears to be a waterfall.
Or you could think of it as the edge of the world.
Yes.
Which Stoic described in his flashback. So that's all we're giving you at that
Yes.
at this point.
Yeah. We wanted to keep the mystery.
That moment of talons on talons spinning into the abyss was a scene we had tried to put in, I think, almost every one of the movies.
Yeah, you had that idea for when Valka meets Hiccup.
Yeah,
and they
some great
like
reference.
A couple of eagles locking talons, and tumbling off.
But this case, we have the black and white yin yang.
Yeah, I know. It
beautiful.
was perfect. Yeah.
Everyone agrees we've definitely traded up. Well done, Chief.
Some beautiful animation here with Fabio Lignini. I love how natural and relatable Hiccup is with his worry. He's immediately casting doubt on the Light Fury. His anxiety over, being the third wheel in this relationship is coming through here.
You know what I mean. She's so wild and skittish.
And it's believable. It remains entertaining. Like, both the way these two characters interact is always really fun.
Strings and let Toothless stretch his wings. Reminds me of a talk I had with Stoic about you. Gah! Where did he keep coming from?
Who?
Those bloody hobgobblers. I swear they're
I love the idea that Tough Nut was just in that tent. he just pops out of the tent for no reason. This was one of the gags that we were a little worried about because, of course, we embrace and celebrate the idea of Hiccup and Gobber and others being heroes with their prosthetics and their amputations. But I think in this case, we didn't know if we had maybe gone too far, and that's part of why we screened the movie for the Amputee Coalition.
And was that, by the way, was the biggest laugh of the entire screening with them.
Grimmel is tracking us.
This is all because of the hobgobblers.
He has 100 ships, maybe more, with enough.
Another moment you tinkered with quite a bit, Dean, huh? Like how to get in and out of this sequence and get this information.
It was much longer, but we realized that we were explaining to the audience what they had already seen. And so we cut it short, and we really just wanted to set up a test for Hiccup. Now that Toothless is nowhere to be found, Hiccup has to make a tough decision as a leader. And we wanted this sequence to be an exciting and gripping depiction of Hiccup's plan without Toothless and how badly it goes awry. It's meant to be confirmation for Hiccup ultimately that he cannot lead without Toothless.
Another incredibly difficult and beautiful lighting sequence, and that combination of the digimat and matte painting in the opening scene is just it's the atmosphere and depth and detail and transformation of the audience into what the scene feels like. It's just the team is just amazing.
And so this was meant to be, we never really said so in the film, but this was meant to be an old trapper's fort. It's just sitting there abandoned, and Grimmel's now using it as the basis for his trap. So the entire armada, the Warlord's armada, is surrounding the island, and Grimmel baits the Dragon Riders closer with that lit window. The whole thing is just a trap waiting to be deployed. These are always tricky moments in movies when you have your villain monologuing, but we realized that we had to get a certain amount out, and this is probably the best time to do it now that he has a captive audience here. Really, we needed to show how they were similar. That ultimately, Grimmel has a reputation to protect, but it's founded on this idea of having made the very opposite choice the first time he came face to face with the Night Fury, the opposite of Hiccups.
So I decided to kill every last one, bringing
We also realized in early screenings that people didn't understand how it was that Grimmel could control his death grippers. And that's what this line is about.
That nonsense dies now, starting with you.
But you have dragons of your own.
These, they're dragon killers, drugged into obedience with their own venom. Not even your precious Alpha could control them. They serve me, and only me. Allow me to demonstrate.
Take cover!
Talk about your action film choreography. Early on we were encouraged by Chris and Donna to really lean into the action on these scenes, and this is a sequence certainly shows that. Amazing escape, great shots that have to travel north while they're being chased out.
The Death Grippers were animated or led by Liron Topaz, and he put a lot of thought into how they move around on those claws and pincers and heavy armored scales across the backs. It's meant to be monstrous things, and I think the way they lunge and attack with their retractable tusks just makes them something out of a nightmare.
I love how Hiccup made the bad decision to do this surprise attack, and Volka and Astrid basically save his bacon by getting him out of there.
Right.
It's
which absolutely serves the story mission. We need to show that Hiccup's confidence is really shaken by nearly getting everyone killed, and in fact leaving one of them behind.
It's comic, that reaction.
Stupid baby everywhere.
Again, this is I think a really nice, bold choice for the color palette coming into the camp of Newburgh after that fiery escape. It just feels perfectly kind of dawn and wet and dewy.
How could you not notice?
And it's a nice depiction of this place that we haven't seen before. I really applaud POV and Dave Walvard and Roger Deakins for establishing some really beautiful looks for the film.
Okay, guys, just keep your helmets on. Toothless and I will fight.
Toothless has the light fury now. He's probably not even coming back.
What?
You gave him his freedom, Hiccup. What were you expecting?
I never thought he'd stay away for
I
good.
remember when we talked about the decision of should we have Roughnut captured? Should she be back at the fort with Grimmel? We all thought this could be hilarious, right? Because she is such a she'd be a tough one, and she's so arrogant and full of herself, and like she is. And then Dean, you wrote a sort of a really long scene for Kristen to sort of do and riff her way through. But what a fun idea! Just the idea of we're going to take Roughnut, we're going to stick her in a cage alongside of Grimmel. We'll see what happens.
Everybody stay put. We will get Roughnut back.
If I recall correctly, actually, Brad, this was your idea that Roughnut would get left behind as a captive that ultimately he just lets go because she's driving him mad. It's a fun idea.
I mean, mine's long, but yours is
Annoy her way to freedom.
Yeah.
stretched at birth. Do you have a twin too? Tough Nut took up all the room in Mom's belly. Otherwise, I'd have a rounder head and more brains. That's science.
I think people are divided about this scene. Some people who can't stand people who won't stop talking are quite easily irritated by Roughnut here. But that's exactly the intent. We needed them to understand.
I know what you're thinking.
why he let her
that gives
go.
the veracity to him letting her go, right? And then
Yeah.
All the boys love
all
him.
within his plan.
Totally lost his chance. That ship has sailed.
But just like having a sequence where, you have the pantomime animation and music to carry it, it's nice to also have a sequence like this where it's reliant purely on just the comedic timing of our actors and some beautiful animation to accompany it.
Oh, the animators had a blast with these scenes. The contrast between his, reaction and her just going on and on about it.
One thing I'll say that people might not know, if you look at the three warlords, the big guy, we've got Ragnar the Rock, we've got Chagatai Khan, and we've got Griselda the Grievous. Those bodies are actually Stoic, Eret, and Valka with different faces and different costumes. We were sort of running up against it, and we didn't have time to really design completely new characters from scratch. So we gave ourselves the mission of taking bodies that we already had, giving them new costumes and new faces. And that's how we ended up with 3 new characters to represent our warlords.
Yeah, in order to create this rich world with so many characters that we've accumulated over the 3 movies, we had to be really creative in how we use resources to create this world, this vast world. And that was one of the tricks we came up with. I should maybe
Now, it could be argued that Hiccup has really bad eyesight because this is the second time in the movie when he flies up and seems to be the last to notice, a massive landmark in front
gaping
of him.
hole in the ocean.
Yeah.
I'd just love to quickly talk about the work that the animators did and we did together to learn to animate flying creatures.
Well, you right now you should probably be talking about the effects.
That's a good point.
Just saying, it's just like the
Touche.
caldera is like one of the most amazing effects
Yeah,
shots
it really
that
is
has ever been done in animation. But
Breathtaking.
if you want to talk about flying,
We will put a pin into that one.
It is really impressive. The idea of the caldera as the entrance to the hidden world, it was a dream I had, and I talked to POV about it, and he did a painting sort of making sense of this idea of a hole in the sea as a massive gaping caldera that rises to the sea surface, and the water would be spilling in 360 degrees. And if you were to fly down through that, you would find your way into this network of tunnels that would open up into caverns, vast spaces that would be lit in an ethereal way with bioluminescence, either in the fungi or through the dragons themselves that take on a different patterned look in this environment as though flying under a black light. We want it to be vast, and so you wouldn't really have a sense of what's the top or what's the bottom, that it would be a home to nurseries of dragons and pods, new dragons that we hadn't seen, and the idea that the water would be interacting with magma down below would create such a steamy atmosphere that you would even start to see coral growing in midair. So just as a location, it was really challenging to design, but especially execute. I know that Dave Wolver talked about this being the most difficult thing in the film to bring to life.
It's a super tricky design conceit to come up with a mythical place on Earth that doesn't feel so fantastical that it's out of keeping with this really basically a naturalistic conceit for a movie. So by tethering it with biological reality, like bioluminescence and steam and water and everything, it really brings an organic quality to it that really makes you think, maybe there is some...
It's a fine line to walk, right? Yeah.
All right, Simon.
Well, now they're walking. Well, I could just quickly talk about that. So every animator had to go through 2 weeks of what we called flight school, where they had to do very specific test shots. One was just flying in air where you don't see any background and you just have to sell the presence of air. And by the way, the crowds animators had to do that too, just to kind of understand how the physics of flight work and how to sell it. It's definitely a great learning experience for all of us to go through that, and I think it pays off because it's really challenging in animation to sell that air is there and exists and carries these really heavy creatures, give them weight and dimension.
Well, it certainly works in this sequence. This is the realization of what we had talked about. We didn't just want a cave. We'd seen that in the first movie. We'd seen a more idyllic cave in the second film, in the Bewilderbeast's lair, where we meet Valka. But this was meant to be a world. The idea that the hidden world would be connected through pockets of vast chambers and tunnels beneath the crust of the earth, running under the oceans, under the continents, interconnected all the way around, so you might find different access points throughout the world. But if the dragons were going to go away at the end of our story as we had planned, we wanted it to feel like a place that was inviting for them, that would be idyllic for dragons, and that would be inhospitable to humans.
That little dance ritual that Toothless and Lightyear do here was sort of, for us, the scene that would describe it now. They've come together, and Toothless knows what to do and how to answer her movements.
Yeah, it is. It's a really nice kind of bookend to that.
We should go.
This is one of my favorite shots because we've always seen Hiccup put the hand up and he tames the dragon. In this case, he throws it up there and the dragon's like not having any of it.
Yeah.
It's like completely defeated.
When even Ashley goes, "This is not going to work, man."
That's a really fun, dynamic escape. Makes me think of, like a theme park thrill ride. Escape from the hidden world. It's a nice balance, and that was the challenge of how do we take a moment that's both, awe-inspiring, and then turn it into something that's ultimately sad through Hiccup's eyes, because he sees that Toothless has, found his place, and he's no longer needed here. And then before we can leave it on a downer, there's this hurried escape facilitated by Toothless. So of the 6 flashbacks, this second one was the most poignant and the least on the nose, in a way. We had some other flashbacks that were maybe a little too relevant to what was going on in the present. But this is thematically what the movie's all about, is this idea that with love comes loss, and that it's part of the deal. It's true of life, and it's being depicted in our story. It's ultimately, I think, the truth that Hiccup comes to accept and embrace by the end of the movie. And with that comes a certain amount of joy. It's part of life, moving on.
I don't want another. Your mom.
One of the things that I loved that, Dean, you tackled in this is it's a mature idea. It's a very mature idea to put into a movie, to say when you love something that you're going to have to, that there's loss, you're going to have to consider letting go of it, that maybe the right thing is something that you don't really want. It's a beautiful conceit.
It's counterintuitive because it's ultimately selfless, and it's harder to switch to that mode when you need someone. This is a sequence that I love. I just love watching it because of the work that the team put into bringing the environment alive. It's just the gentle breeze that's moving through the grass and the tree limbs in the background, through the hair. And it has such a fine-tuned finish to it that it just blows me away, because in the 10 years that we've been working on these movies, the technology has grown with us, and it's reached a point where I think I can honestly say, if you can imagine an image on screen, it can be created now. There doesn't seem to be any limitation given the tools that we have.
We never would have done 4-foot tall grasses we couldn't have made that choice in the past. And this is testament to if your allergies are psychosomatic, this series of shots might induce hay fever. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Roughnut? Miss me?
How did you escape?
I annoyed them till they let me go.
Wait. Grimmel let you go.
So dumb. They couldn't handle me. See, everyone thinks Tough Nut's more annoying, but...
Wait, hold on.
I like this moment because Hiccup, in past versions of the script, I had written him to be a lot more selfish, and it was pretty unlikable. He came back having declared his presence in the hidden world, commanding Toothless to come to him and dragging him back, and everyone else was calling him out on it. And it was just a low moment for Hiccup where he certainly wasn't being heroic. But I thought the intention was to have it be his dark moment of being ultimately really selfish, and that causing Toothless's capture. But in refining it, and through the help of the team and screenings that we had, we came to realize that simply having him realize that he didn't belong in the hidden world, and that Toothless clearly did, that was actually enough, because the Light Fury's appearance kind of caused him to regress really rapidly. He was reaching a moment of selflessness, and then when the Light Fury appeared, he thought, oh, great, I don't have to go there. We can't all be together. He can have his cake and eat it too. And that's right on the heels of Grimmel's attack. So ultimately, it still does the same function. It still leaves Hiccup feeling responsible for Toothless's capture, and it drives him toward his third act epiphany that he needs to do something. He needs to kind of lay it all out to get Toothless back and reverse what he's done.
You tried your best, but you are nothing without your dragon.
That was really nicely handled. I thought, when you're working with dragons, you want to make them too anthropomorphic in this case. And so it was, how do we communicate that Toothless is commanding his flock to not attack and ultimately follow? It was challenging, but the animators managed to pull it off. I think it's clear in pantomime that he has a sense of strategy, and that he's having them bide their time until there's a better plan.
Great. Now what? I think it's time for number 2 to become number 1.
He'll listen to you.
This was meant to be a bit of a callback to the first movie as well. Hiccup and Astrid standing on the cliff after Stoic had sailed off with Toothless to find the nest. It's another moment where she's come to his aid when he's feeling most defeated, to remind him that he's more than he thinks of himself. He actually has this tenacity in him that was there long before he met Toothless, and ultimately she's dredging that up.
Well, it also, they're the perfect complement for one another, really. She gives him the tenacity. He wouldn't have it, I don't think, without Astrid, right? That's what she helps light inside him. And I think for her, he helps not just act like a warrior all the time. He thinks things through. They really are a perfect complement as a couple, which is, the other thing throughout this story, we're trying to set up all of those things so they build to a place where we believe in both of them as a set to lead the Vikings of Berg.
Material. At last, faithful pupil, you are ready.
How are we gonna get our dragons back?
Once again, Pablo and the team, the lighting on this is just amazing. Mm-hmm. The crowd's work, James Thornton and the crowd's team. It's just, there's a master strategy to each one of these sequences, both whether it's the lighting temperature up on top of the island, down below by the Armada, and where the dragons are coming in, where the dragons are leaving.
They're tracking the continuity over, 4 or 5 minutes of screen time like so that the directions of the dragons and the numbers that you see shot by shot, that actually feels like a real continuity. And those guys did a really big job and challenging job to get that right.
Let's go!
Here's where the benefit of having a really tall island helps us out. Because using the wingsuits, they were able to make their way down to the Armada, which is conveniently placed just off the shore of the island. So it allows them a heroic plan to hurtle in there and try to stop what's going on without dragons.
Well, that's funny. You know, we always have this conversation about, you know, hundreds of different aspects in the movie, but it's like, hey, where did they get their wingsuits? It's like, should we show them making them earlier in the movie so we know that they put them on? Or it's like sometimes it's just a little bit of movie magic.
Yeah, I mean, there's one indication of it in the beginning, actually, in the opening sequence when Fish Legs flies in, when he crashes to the deck, he says, "I'm still getting the hang of my wings." That was intentionally there to help set up without broadcasting it that they all have these wingsuits.
And we tend to overthink it too, and then explain it too much, and then cut it back out, and then find out whether the audience is getting it or they're confused by it.
This is also meant to be a payoff of the earlier idea that they as a team don't work very well together without their dragons. And so here they are finally kind of covering each other's backs and working together and saving the dragons instead of the dragons saving them.
So here we have some of the most complex scenes that I've ever worked on in animation, that feel much more like visual effects shots, where the camera is incredibly kinetic and moving all the time, and you have elements on multiple layers, and you try to sell gravity and readability at the same time, particularly the shots where Grimmel is, where the airship starts falling apart and Hiccup is trying to free Toothless while he's on it. These shots are about to come up, and just to make it read and have the story track, like in these sections here, it's a big challenge. We're not really used to, in character animation, to stage shots like this, like swinging elements and delivering dialogue, and it was a real challenge, and we took quite a bit of time to get these right. And you always, in animation, the camera, even though you think the camera is doing, you know, the right thing when they come out of layout, once the performance is in there and the action's in there, you have to adjust the cameras again, and then you have to adjust the animation again, so you kind of chase each other's tails. Very, very, very tricky shots to get right and to make them read, and then you throw it over to effects and lighting, and you know they have to then also make sure that it reads. And at first, when you conceive these scenes, you don't know exactly how all these elements are going to come together, so you constantly react to what you're seeing and you build as you go.
Number 2, coming through! Surprise! Sorry about that! Come on! One more free, 4 to go!
Here again is one of the examples of just how well the team is working together.
Yeah, it's almost like we're a team.
Once again, John Carr, our editor, and the team came up with great ways of cross-cutting the action so that we could tell both sides of the story. Hiccup rescuing Toothless, going after the Light Fury, and then the team working together on the deck to turn back this armada. Now, if you noticed earlier, Toothless commands Cloudjumper, Skullcrusher, and Grump to go back to the island, and that's them arriving with Valka, Eret, and Gobber. Very subtle, but that's how we explain how they arrive. The lightning flashes here are just just to help set up how Toothless is going to ultimately defeat the Death Grippers, so that there's passing storm activity.
Get him off her back without hurting her. Fear the face
That really made him mad. The worst thing that could happen to him.
Such a silly idea, played out for all it's worth. Character who can't grow a beard. That's one of
And this
his
is
hair woven around his face.
the resolution to the Gobber
The Hobgobblers, yeah.
storyline.
Their growing numbers actually had a little payoff.
It wasn't a bad omen for him, it was a bad omen for...
For the warlords.
Yep. And that was my favorite shot. Astrid, the backhanded chop. It's just awesome.
This is where the team always surprises me, because we'll see these shots in storyboards and then they become pretty amazing in previs during the layout phase. When you see them fully realized once the effects team has had their way and lighting's done their thing, man, just the scale and the destruction. It's fantastic. So here they are in the spires, the snow-capped spires of New Berk. We have 6 Death Grippers. 2 of them went down with the burning ship. Now he's got these 2 that he's temporarily dealt with, and then the other 2 that make up the 6. And now he's got 4 on his tail, and we needed a way to get rid of them because they're pretty formidable. And we thought, well, the Light Fury taught him how to cloak. But for Toothless, it took more than a fireball. It took an arc of electricity.
When we saw these shots coming out of story and layout, we didn't know how we were going to do this, because you have black dragons that jump a black dragon, and it's night and flashing lights.
See, that was your shot.
Oh yeah, cool. That came together well. This great. I actually hadn't seen this shot.
So the idea is that the
That shot we changed.
shot you changed last minute. It works
that
well.
lightning bolt not only did away with the 4 Death Grippers, but it was enough to cloak both Toothless and Hiccup, because Hiccup's wearing Toothless scales. And ultimately it comes down to this, that Hiccup was willing to give up his own life so that Toothless could be safe with the Light Fury. He knew that he'd be safer with her.
This is...
And intentionally we wanted Hiccup to start to lose all of his add-ons.
That's my favorite shot right there.
Yeah, beautiful,
That is
beautiful
just
effects.
gorgeous slow motion.
Yeah, with the change in perspective as we
Grimmel would
fall down.
rip away the wings, and Hiccup's already lost his dragon blade. There's all these bits and pieces that he's supplemented. They all fall away until he himself detaches the last one. And that becomes Grimmel's demise. The design of that, in terms of the sound design, we wanted music to take over when it goes into slow motion. And for that piercing missile sound that is the trademark sound of Toothless, and as it turns out the Light Fury as well, that would pierce the music and bring us back to real time. This was a little tricky in that, by the time you have that victory moment coming out of the climax of the movie, I think the audiences are ready to just pack it up and get out of their seats and head home. But we still have a bit of storytelling to do here, so we had to keep it moving. We couldn't linger on anything for too long. Just keep the audience in their seats and let them know that there's more that's going to happen, and actually the most poignant moments of the movie are coming up. So it was
the most poignant moments in a trilogy, really. I mean, that was really the demand of Dean, you saying let's make it a trilogy. Is there's more endings here. We need to wrap up relationships. We need to wrap up everything. And so there's a lot of completions that are demanded by your aspiration to do a trilogy.
And I think the first time you talked about the trilogy, to me at least, I remember you talking about that bittersweet ending.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, so, sort of one of the driving engines of your desire to make it into a trilogy.
You're right, bud. It's time. I was so busy fighting for a world that
The dragon animation here is just beautiful, I think. There's so much being communicated. We know that Toothless has a great loyalty to Hiccup,
you've looked after us for long enough.
but he also knows that he doesn't belong there anymore, that there's something awaiting him in the distance. And so when he looks out to that horizon and back to Hiccup, he's really saying, is it time? And Hiccup understands. He's been with Toothless for so long that he knows what that look means. And so I think what's being communicated, even though Hiccup is speaking, is largely understood between Toothless and Hiccup. I think the other dragons might be a little confused as to what's going on. They're all having their saddles removed. But centrally, I think our central cast, they all understand what's happening. And if Hiccup's going to go through with it, then they in solidarity are going to let go as well. And it was all building up to the moment of that hand coming away from Toothless's muzzle. I wanted to repeat that in reverse because it was such an iconic moment from the first movie, and it seemed like a nice bookend to be able to say goodbye that way.
I want you to be free. Our world doesn't deserve you. Yet.
So hats off to Dane Stogner and the team who handled Toothless. I think there's just some really gorgeous stuff here.
And honestly, that tear is an artful tear as well. We sort of, it's not the main focus of the shot. And as soon as you realize that the tear's running down his face, you realize it's sort of happened. It's a beautiful, I think, choice how to play that.
It's a delicate thing to bring the audience to this moment where they accept that this is the right course of action.
Yeah, that was the great challenge in all of this. We recognize that our fans really like Toothless and Hiccup together and the other characters with their dragons. So how were we going to tell a story in which the dragons go away at the end and not have those fans hate us for it? Hopefully, we've accomplished that. Hopefully, we've taken the audience on a journey where they understand that this was ultimately the only solution and the right solution. And that Hiccup's sacrifice is inspiring. That was the idea. Really, it all comes down to the ultimate inspiration behind all of this was meeting Cressida Cowell toward the end of the making of the first movie, and she said that her last book was going to tackle the disappearance of dragons and why they aren't here anymore. And I thought that was really gripping and emotional. So even though the narratives are quite different between the films and the books, I thought it was a worthy goal for the end of the movie. To suggest a time in which dragons roamed this world and that they had disappeared and their whereabouts is a mystery. And I really loved the idea of getting to that opening line of Cressida's first book, which is Hiccup as an older man reflecting back on his youth. And the line is, "There were dragons when I was a boy." I thought that was quite stirring. And so that was the goal of the end of this movie and this trilogy, was to try to take us to that place where he could be reflecting back with fondness. So what I'd imagined was our group gathered together on a cliff, looking out on a horizon that's no longer teeming with dragons. And over that, we would hear those opening lines. And that's exactly what we have coming up.
Full, thick beard.
Oh, so beautiful. Gross. Okay, you win. I like sensitive guys.
It was also a goal to have a Viking funeral and a Viking wedding in this trilogy. And so that moment fulfilled that goal. This shot was an intentional callback to Hiccup, a close-up on Hiccup when he was in Stoic's arms in that first flashback. We wanted to repeat it and kind of dupe the audience so they expect to see Stoic, and in fact they see a grown Hiccup now, 10 years later.
Yeah, what's fun about one of the conceits of this epilogue is there's these little cards where sort of curtains were pulling back, and oh, is that young Hiccup? Oh my gosh, it's his son. Oh, they have a son and a daughter. And then what? Oh, they're back on the edge of the caldera. And then ultimately the reveal of the dragon babies, which is just cutest thing on earth.
We call them night lights because they're a combination, of course, of the Night Fury and the Light Fury. And we wanted them to have a combination of traits. So if you look at them closely, they'll have some of Toothless's features, some of the Light Fury's features as well.
You always talked about this scene in Born Free at the end when the lioness returns to visit the human village, and
I think Christian and the Lion, and there's so many videos of trainers and people who had interactions with either big cats or gorillas going back years later and having that moment of reconnection.
Sort of the time it takes to realize, for the animal to realize that that's somebody they know. It's really powerful.
Yeah, it's really heartwarming.
This next shot, I think it was Rough Layout, had this super, in our early screenings, had this super frightened little girl, the expression, and the audience used to crack up every time it looked at her, and it made its way over into an idea for the animation. It was really cute.
Also, the boy hiding his head under Astrid's cape. That was an idea brought by the animator Lena, and it really worked.
We were trying to sort of play the kids as the inverse of their parents.
Yes.
So that the girl is the nerdy kid that draws and takes notes, and the boy is the blonde
kind of brash adventurer. Yeah. So this sequence also definitely softens the blow of saying goodbye to the dragons, to know that they went back there, had one last joyride with them, were able to have their kids experience what they had experienced flying on the backs of the dragons, and even a reunion with Astrid and Stormfly. We wanted a bittersweet ending, but we didn't want to depress our audience either, and I think this really helps kind of leave people feeling hopeful and like they went on quite the roller coaster of emotion, but hopefully come out in a positive way.
Yes, the world believes the dragons are gone.
And just this idea that the dragons could still be waiting there for us once we figure out our own problems as human beings. There's something sort of uplifting and joyful about that as well.
In peace.
Lastly, the concept for these end credits is that we wanted to revisit the relationship, so we went right back to Hiccup and Toothless having their first moment of communion and that first contact and getting to know one another, and it's just moments throughout all three movies kind of connected together against a beautiful song by Jonsi, who's been part of all three films, writing music for us. I think the lyrics are particularly poignant.
Well, we always talk about in these movies, there's tons of individual accomplishment, but the incredible reflection, really, after you watch the movie, even now as we watch it all together, it's just, it's 275, 300 people coming together, and none is greater than the other. No really contributions any greater than the other. It's it's an amalgamation of dedicated people trying to make great ideas. And it's not really limitations weren't a function of budget. They probably a function of time more than anything else, but just great folks trying to do great things that they're going to be proud of 20 years from now.
And if you removed one element, it doesn't hold up. Like all these pieces had to come together to be able to create these movies.
And at the end of it, I think we're at a moment where we're beginning to look back and realize what an accomplishment it was for all of us to be together for 10 years. Largely the same team. We had new people that joined us for each of the installments, but a lot of the same key players. And this has been a part of our lives for 10 years. We've worked together as a team. We've watched these characters grow up on screen together. And so not only are the characters within the story saying goodbye, but we're saying goodbye to these characters as well, and to one another. Who knows if we will be together working on another film in the same capacity, and everything's unknown from here on out. But I think it's been an amazing, wonderful 10 years of growth and friendship and inspiration. I'm very thankful. All right, this is Dean Debois signing out. Hope you enjoyed our commentary and learned a few things about the movie.
Yeah, and this is Brad as well. And just thanks to everybody for watching the movie, loving the movie. As we put it out there like our children. We hope that they're loved. Thanks for the incredible support we had from DreamWorks. You can see how many credits are going by. It's a incredible organization of dedicated folks.
Yeah, I think we should really say thank you to the studio and giving us the chance to work on a trilogy like this. I think it's very rare in a career to have an opportunity to work on something like this and make it such an amazing place. So I'm Simon Otto, and I'd like to sign out as well. Thanks for listening.